I'm going to do an insight video today. Yesterday I was speaking about cycles of growth, and I was talking about sort of like dissolving. And again, sort of like there seems to be this kind of theme happening of late, like especially with the insights and sort of like the energy that I'm sort of like connecting to at the moment. And they were talking to me about something like the eternal self yesterday. There's many different aspects to beingness, and very many different aspects to sort of the infinite self and the universal self. There's many different dimensions, many different realities, many different sort of vibrations and frequencies. And they keep talking about sort of like infinite self. They keep talking about sort of like higher self, and that they were talking about something called like the eternal self yesterday. And all of these are still part of the same whole. I've talked about this before, about the fact that everything is connected, nothing is separate. And this is sort of like the biggest thing about when you start on the spiritual path, that you start to really realize that everything's connected. And there's many different ways of looking at something. It's not like one way, or it's not one way of sort of like being, or like spiritual, and like this infinite self that we have can sort of vibrate and exist on many different sort of frequencies and many different vibrations at once. And the eternal self is very much again in this kind of sort of like not bracket, but like this kind of reality. And it's sort of like the more I'm sort of going along this path at the moment, the more these kind of things are coming forward. I do sort of like writing as well, so I'd sit there and sort of like I'd open like a Word document, I'd write some stuff down, and it's all like wisdom, it's all sort of like spiritual insights, understanding, spiritual wisdom that come through. And again, yesterday it was very much around this, like this sense of like eternal self was very much around sort of talking about again going away. I was reading something today, and they were talking about like non-duality and sort of moving past that. And in a sense, like I was just looking at Facebook, and something came through, or like I was directed something. Somebody was talking, like I think it was Bruno Melchizedek or something, and he was talking about like non-duality. And very much in like the spirit world and in spiritual reality and spiritual sort of understanding, where you start to get into vibrations and frequencies, you start to like oneness, you start to realize that there's like harmony to everything, and there's also two sides to everything, but there's infinite sort of like vibrations and frequencies to something. It's not one way. And sort of like all things are interconnected, all things are part of the same whole. But it's also sort of like you move past like good and bad, and you move past sort of looking at things in that kind of view, in that kind of like, because you sort of like, we all have this view, we have this perspective, and as your consciousness expands, which consciousness is expanding all the time for people. And this is part of the eternal self as well. The eternal self is in the moment. It's in the moment for everything. Everything is a vibration. Everything is a frequency, and nothing sort of like is separate. But it's also the eternal self is this kind of notion that you transmute everything and you transform everything. And in this moment, in this time, in this second, right now, you are connected to all realities, all dimensions, all realms at once, because the eternal self moves past sort of like, we talk about death and stuff like that. In spiritual beliefs, it's like a transmutation. It's a change in a different state of being. And the eternal self is this. The eternal self doesn't know, sort of like it's always has been. It's always connected. It's always part of the whole. It's part of the oneness vibration, the oneness frequency of the universe. And the eternal self is moved through all things and moves through all things. And we all have this. We all have like an eternal self that's the many different sort of incarnations, many different sort of like realities and many different frequencies. And the eternal self knows that it's in the moment, and it's connected to the universal source, and it's always seeing things not as like good or bad, or not as sort of like, it just sees like the openings. It sees the moment, the energy, the vibration, the frequency, and it knows that all things can be sort of transmuted in any second, in any moment. So the eternal self go, you know, has always been. And it's like everything is rebirth and death to the eternal self. It's like every moment there's a chance to shift and change and release energy. And in this sense, this was what was being given to me yesterday when I was sitting there and I was trying to write about something. And it was saying about being in the eternal moment of frequency and vibration, and that each and every one of us can shift and change things consciously. And when we're in that eternal self, we know there's no good or bad, there's no up or down, there just is. And at any moment we can, you know, if we become conscious and we become connected to that self, that eternal self, we can shift and change and move through anything. And this is what it was saying to me yesterday, and it all sort of like again connects into what's been talking about. I was talking about the universal law of rhythm yesterday, and this is like the rhythm of the universe, which is the flow of the universe. As we start to move into this eternal self, we realise that we're beings of light and energy, and we're vibrational spiritual beings of frequency, and that consciously we've always been that. You know, we're born from the source, we return to the source. This is our eternal self, this is our essence. And it's sort of like it's waking up to knowing that, you know, when you can be in that moment with that eternal self, you open it up to the source energy, the universal source, and that you can actually just remain in that frequency and actually see how you can shift and change things. See how you can apply sort of insights and wisdom to moments to change. That change is constant. Change is constantly going on, and when you're in the eternal self, you just see things as shifts, as frequencies, as vibrations. You don't see it as good or bad. You don't see it as like challenges. You just see there's an opportunity to open up and become more aligned, more sort of in harmony, and more conscious of you know, and knowing that, you know, creation and the flow of the universe is constantly flowing in, and you're a constant channel. You know, you're a constant channel for that. The eternal self knows this, and it's like, and this is the consciousness, like the awakening, having the awareness that, you know, in that moment you can shift and change it. And again, this is you know, we talk about ascended masters and we talk about the universal laws. The universal laws, you know, when you start connecting into like this eternal self, you realize the universal laws are there. And when I say laws, they're vibrations, they're frequencies, they're sort of like, they are laws. You know, we deem them as laws, but they're vibrations, they're frequencies to expression, they're frequencies to you know, opening, their frequencies to allowing more light and more energy and more consciousness within your sort of being. And when I say being, again, being is beyond sort of like our human self. Being is being the sort of like, it is that alignment that with that source energy again. And the eternal self tells us this. It tells us that we are these beings of light, and that we have always been. You know, we you know, we can move through anything. And it's like when they talk about death, it's like we are constantly going through this shedding. We are constantly going through these, you know, this shifting, and these like cycles of death and rebirth are constantly happening. And it's like the more we be less attached we become to them, the more we become open to the spiritual sort of like insight and the spiritual awarenesses that we can, you know, that we can actually sort of like, and in this self, and it also brings forward that, you know, these things that, you know, that we look at, that we get attached to, that we think are big issues, are actually, you know, they're moments of vibration, they're moments of frequency, and all we have to do is just attach that frequency and sort of like, you know, with that eternal self, and move through it, because we've always done that. We've always been through these changes, and we've always been through these this shifting, this alignment. We've always done it. This is the many sort of cycles of the infinite cycles of death and rebirth as spiritual beings, where we've reincarnated and stuff like that. And again, this is what it's saying, and it's very much connected to us individually, but again on the collective level, the eternal self knows these infinite, you know, changes within this planet, within this dimension, within many different dimensions and realities, has always been. And when we start to connect into that, then the things that, you know, on the 3D reality and the human self that we attach to and we connect to, we realise, You know, again, they are this illusion of the physical mind. When, you know, if you're in the infinite mind or this eternal self, you move past that. And this is what this time's about. Again, it's about this shedding and changing. And these kind of insights started to happen a couple of days ago when I started to look at things differently, and they gave me some energy. And it was also, again, it very much connects to sort of the experience I've had over the last couple of days, in relation to where I was feeling very much, you know, like like Monday specifically. I felt quite a big shift on Monday. I had an insight about awareness and master's teachings, and then like 2 or 3 days after that, I've had like quite intense experience of going through different energy shifts and patterns and frequencies, of old cycles and old frequencies. But they're not even old, they're like habits that we go through. We return to, you know, experiencing things that we've done, and they've been coming up, and this eternal self started to sort of like appear, or the notion or the understanding of that eternal self appeared through what was going on in that moment. You know, from Monday to now, where Monday morning I was very bright and heightened, and then the external reality, there was lots of things going on, and it like brought me to the internal reality. So sometimes what's happening externally is sort of like, it needs to happen to shift and change us to bring us to this internal sort of, or like the eternal self, you know, the infinite self. And again, it's a direct sort of like lesson again, that, you know, that all things are connected, nothing's separate, and everything is working out how it should do, and how it's supposed to be. And again, this connects to the universal law of correspondence, when you talk about the inner and the outer, and again, it's talking about the duality of these two experiences, because they are both playing out in perfect harmony. And again, this shows the eternal self of again, when you sort of like, you're talking about not getting caught up in labels, and not getting caught up in like judgments, and not getting caught up in sort of like something's good or something's bad. It's looking for the deeper meaning again. And this is, again, the eternal self brings this, and I've talked about this many times in many different sort of like videos, where you talk about the deeper meaning, and the deeper meaning of self, and how many layers and how many vibrations and frequencies. But it's also, it's seeing past, you know, the surface stuff, and going beyond that, because there's insights and information, and the flow of the universe is working through that. And again, once we start to get to that eternal self, we start to see the deeper meaning. And again, this connects to dissolving, illumination, all those kind of things that I've talked about in many of these readings before, or these insights. But this eternal self is a different shift, because it means you walk as the light, you know your light, and you walk as it. And then what you do is you stay in the frequency and the vibration, and everything is frequency and vibration. It's moving away. Although you are integrating this eternal self and these infinite selves within a physical reality and a physical, you know, experience, what you're doing is you're allowing your physical body to activate or become like aligned with these higher vibrations, these higher frequencies. So your human body then becomes a body of light, a body of light, with like this eternal consciousness, this eternal understanding, this eternal wisdom. And then what you start to do is then you can start to see the challenges and things like that. They're just frequencies, they're just vibrations, and they're not really something that is holding you back. And in that moment, again, this connects to like Saint Germain of like transmutation and transformation, that it brings insight and awareness, and it's very light. It's very sort of like, it's the vibration of this eternal self is not like all encompassing, and it feels heavy. It feels very light. It feels very freeing. It feels very liberating, because you start to realize you can move through these things, and actually they're not things that are stopping you. And you also know that you've been through many of these cycles before, and this is the natural process of sort of like ascension, of awareness, of sort of like spiritual evolution for you individually, but also collectively, because souls have been doing these for eons, you know what I mean, eons of reality and stuff like that. And spiritually, we've been doing it consciously for for so long. I want to say millennia, but I don't know where that's coming from, but that's the kind of the words I want to use. And this is the eternal self. It's so much more. It's so much more greater than just this reality. And again, this is what's so important when you really start to expand consciously. You realize you're never trying to get anywhere. You already are there. You've always been there. It's like this is what the eternal self tells you, that there's many sort of like, when you go for spiritual reality, many people are trying to get somewhere. They're trying to trying to connect to the spirit world or connect to their guides, and they feel like it's something that they've got to get to, when actually the eternal self tells us we've always been there, and we're always been a channel, we're always receiving. It's just whether we become conscious, and whether we start to become conscious of vibrations and frequencies and energy, because the flow's always been there, and the infinite beings of light, understanding, wisdom, guidance, teachers have always been around us, and we've always been part of that. We've never been separate from it, and this is what this eternal self tells us. And we've always been part of these, having the ability to shift and change and move through these frequencies, these vibrations of experience that happen to us externally. But externally, again, is only sort of like a reflection of what, when we're connected into that internal self, that we can start to move through that. And it's been in that infinite eternal moment, and knowing that there's vibration and frequencies there, and that eternal self has always shifted and changed it. And once you start to connect to that eternal self, you realize that you have the ability to move through anything, and everything is not good or bad. It's just part of the whole. Again, it's part of this whole cycle of awakening and awareness. That's the insight for today.